The stars looked different when you were staring at death. Captain Jake Morrison had seen plenty of battles in his 15 years commanding ships in the Outer Rim, but nothing quite like the wreckage floating before them now. The Meridian moved slowly through the debris field, her engines barely humming as they navigated between chunks of twisted metal and what looked like organic matter. Jake stood on the bridge watching the main screen with his arms crossed. The readings made no sense. According to every database they had, the ship they were looking at should not exist anymore. The massive vessel stretched nearly 2 miles from bow to stern, its hull a sickly mixture of dark metal and what appeared to be living tissue. Parts of it still pulsed weakly, like a dying heartbeat. "Captain, I'm getting some weird readings here," said Pete Williams from his station at Communications. Pete was young, maybe 25, with nervous hands that always seemed to be adjusting something on his console. He had joined the crew 6 months ago and still jumped at shadows sometimes. "Define weird," Jake replied without taking his eyes off the screen. "Well, sir, the computer says that's a Korthek Apex-class dreadnought. But according to our records, the last one of those was destroyed 3 years ago in the Vega system." Jake felt his stomach tighten. Everyone in human space knew about the Korthek and their bioships. The alien race had been humanity's greatest nightmare for nearly a decade, sweeping through the outer colonies with their living warships that could heal themselves and adapt to any weapon humanity threw at them. The Apex-class vessels were the worst of all, commanded by genetically engineered warriors who seemed to exist only to kill and conquer. Dr. Lisa Carter looked up from her scanner at the science station. Lisa was in her early 30s with brown hair always tied back in a practical ponytail. She had the kind of calm demeanor that made everyone feel safer during a crisis. "The biosignatures are definitely Korthek, but they're degrading rapidly. Whatever happened to that ship, it's dying." "Good," muttered Tony Martinez from the security station. Tony was built like a brick wall and had scars on his arms from fighting Korthek raiders 5 years back. He never talked much about what happened during that battle, but Jake knew it had been bad. Amy Rodriguez spun around in her chair at the engineering console. Amy was probably the smartest person Jake had ever met, and at 28 she could fix anything with an engine or a power core. "Captain, I'm reading massive system failures throughout that ship. The bioneural networks are shutting down. Life support is failing. That thing won't last another 6 hours." Jake walked closer to the main screen. The Korthak ship looked like a dying whale floating in space. Its organic sections had turned from their normal dark purple to a sickly gray color, and he could see atmosphere bleeding out from dozens of hull breaches. "Any signs of escape pods or lifeboats?" "Negative, sir," Pete reported. "But I am detecting one life sign. It's faint, but it's definitely there." "Korthek." "Yes, sir." "Biosignature indicates it's an Apex-caste individual." The bridge went quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. An Apex wasn't just a military rank among the Korthek, it was a biological classification. These beings were created in genetic laboratories to be perfect killing machines. They were stronger, faster, and smarter than baseline Korthek, and baseline Korthek were already bad enough. An Apex could tear through a squad of human soldiers like they were made of paper. "Sir," Lisa said carefully, "that life sign is getting weaker. Whatever's wrong with that ship, it's affecting the survivor too." Jake stared at the dying vessel and thought about the colonies that had been burned by ships just like it. He thought about the families torn apart, the children who would never see their parents again, the soldiers who had died fighting these monsters. Every rational part of his mind told him to turn around and leave. Let the thing die alone in the dark, but another part of his mind, the part that had made him a captain in the first place, wouldn't let him do it. "Amy, how long would it take to prep a shuttle?" Amy blinked in surprise. "About 20 minutes, sir, but ... But what, Captain?" Tony interrupted, his voice hard. "You're not seriously thinking about going over there?" Jake turned to face his security chief. "There's a dying being on that ship, Tony. A dying being that's probably killed hundreds of our people," Tony shot back. Sir, with respect, an apex is the most dangerous thing in known space, even a wounded one. The readings show it's trapped under debris, Lisa added quietly. Probably injured badly. The bio-decay from the ship is spreading to its nervous system. Jake looked around at his crew. He could see the confusion and concern on their faces. Pete was chewing his lip nervously. Amy looked like she wanted to argue but was holding back. Tony's expression was somewhere between angry and worried. Captain, Lisa continued, I've been studying Korthic biology for 8 years. If we don't get that individual medical attention soon, it's going to die. The bio-decay will shut down its nervous system within hours. Maybe that's for the best, Tony said. Jake understood his security chief's feelings. He really did. But as he stared at the dying ship, he found himself thinking about something his father had told him years ago. His dad had been a ship captain, too, running cargo between the inner worlds. He used to say that you could judge a person's character, not by how they treated their friends, but by how they treated their enemies when those enemies were helpless. Amy, prep the shuttle, Jake said finally. Lisa, get your medical kit and anything you think might help with Korthic physiology. Tony, you're with us. Sir, I really think... That's an order, Chief. Tony's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Yes, sir. As the crew moved to carry out his orders, Jake kept staring at the alien ship. He knew this was probably a mistake. He knew it could get them all killed. But somewhere in that dying vessel was a living being, and Jake Morrison had never been the kind of man who could just walk away from that. Even if that being was his enemy, the Meridian continued its slow approach to the Korthic dreadnought. While inside the human ship, 4 people prepared to board a vessel that represented everything they had been taught to fear. None of them knew that this single decision would change the course of galactic history. All they knew was that someone was dying alone, and that was something they couldn't ignore. The shuttle docked with the Korthic ship with a soft thud that echoed through the small craft. Jake sat in the pilot's seat looking at the readings on his screen. The atmosphere on the other side of the airlock was breathable for humans, but barely. The temperature was dropping fast and the air was full of toxic particles from the dying biosystems. Environmental suits everyone, Jake ordered as he powered down the shuttle. The 4 humans checked each other's gear one final time. Lisa had her medical scanner and a bag full of equipment that might work on alien biology. Tony carried a plasma rifle and enough ammunition to fight off a small army. Amy brought her engineering tools and a portable power unit. Jake sealed his helmet and opened the airlock. The smell hit them immediately, even through their air filters. It was the smell of death and decay, mixed with something that reminded Jake of burned plastic. The corridor they stepped into had once been beautiful in an alien way. The walls were made of living tissue that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Now those patterns were fading and the walls hung limp like dead skin. Follow me, Lisa said, checking her scanner. The life sign is about 200 meters forward and down 1 level. They moved carefully through the dying ship. Emergency lighting flickered weakly from organic pods scattered along the ceiling. The floor was spongy under their feet, made of the same biomaterial as the walls. In some places it had begun to rot, leaving holes that they had to step around. This place gives me the creeps, Pete whispered over the comm system. Stay focused, Tony replied, his weapon ready. We don't know what else might be alive on this ship. They passed through several chambers that must have been crew quarters. The Korthic slept in cocoon-like pods that hung from the ceiling. Most of the pods had burst open and were empty, but a few still contained the remains of the ship's crew. Jake tried not to look too closely. The decay is spreading faster than I expected, Lisa reported, studying her readings. This whole ship is basically one giant organism, and it's dying from some kind of bioweapon. I've never seen anything like this. They reached a shaft that led to the lower level. The biolift wasn't working, so Amy rigged a rappelling system. Using cables from her engineering kit, one by one they descended into the darker sections of the ship. The smell got worse as they went down. Life sign is getting stronger, Lisa said when they reached the bottom. It's just ahead. The corridor opened into a large chamber that Jake realized must be the ship's command center. The walls were covered with organic computer systems that looked like giant brains connected by nerve-like cables. Most of them were dark now, but a few still pulsed weakly with dying thoughts, and there, pinned under a collapsed section of the ceiling, was the most terrifying thing Jake had ever seen. The apex was enormous, even lying on its side and trapped. Under debris, Jake could tell it was at least 8 feet tall. It had 4 arms, each ending in hands with fingers that looked like they could tear through steel. Its skin was dark purple, almost black, with a texture that seemed to shift and change as Jake watched. Biomechanical implants covered parts of its body, connected to its nervous system by thin cables, but it was the creature's head that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. It was elongated, almost skull-like, with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle. The top eye was larger than the other 2, and all 3 were a brilliant gold color that seemed to glow in the dim light. The apex's middle. I focused on them as they approached. When it spoke, the universal translator built into their suits rendered its voice as deep and resonant like distant thunder. "Humans," it said, and Jake could hear surprise in that alien voice. "I am Vector the Destroyer, Apex of the 7th Fleet. You have come to witness my death." Jake stepped forward carefully, his hands visible and empty. "We detected your ships. Distress signal. We came to help." The creature made a sound that might have been laughter, though it came out as more of a grinding noise. "Help? You know what I am, human? You know what I have done to your species?" Lisa was already scanning the apex with her medical equipment. "Multiple internal injuries. Severe trauma to the thoracic cavity. The biodecay from the ship is spreading through its nervous system." She looked up at Jake. "Captain, if we don't get it medical attention soon, it's going to die?" "Good," Tony muttered, though he kept his weapon lowered. Vector's 3 eyes turned to focus on the security chief. "Your warrior speaks wisdom. I have burned your colonies. I have killed thousands of your kind. I have taken your children as slaves for the collective. Why would you help me?" Jake found himself studying the alien's face. Even through the fearsome appearance, he could see something that surprised him. Pain, yes, but something else too. Loneliness, fear, this creature that had terrorized human. Space for years was afraid of dying alone. "Because that's what we do," Jake said simply. He began to unzip his environmental suit. "Captain, what are you doing?" Amy asked. Jake pulled off his jacket, the same brown leather jacket he had worn for 5 years of commanding ships. It was battered and worn, with patches on the elbows and a small burn mark from a plasma conduit that had exploded 2 years ago. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and it was his. The apex watched in apparent confusion as Jake knelt beside the massive alien and carefully draped the jacket over its shoulders. The jacket looked tiny against the creature's bulk, like putting a blanket on an elephant. But Jake tucked it in as best he could around the trapped alien's upper torso. Vector's 3 eyes went wide. All 3 pupils dilated, and the creature's breathing changed. It stared at Jake for a long moment without speaking. "You cover me," the apex said finally, its voice carrying a note of wonder. "I am dying, and you cover me with your own protection." "You looked cold," Jake said. The alien continued to stare at him. "I do not understand. In my prime, I could tear you apart with one hand. I have destroyed ships larger than yours." "I am your enemy." Pete spoke up from where he stood near the chamber entrance. "Maybe, but you're not our enemy right now. Right now, you're just hurt." Tony lowered his weapon completely. "And alone?" The apex fell silent, its golden eyes moving from one human face to another. Jake could see it trying to process what was happening. This creature had been bred for war, created to be the perfect killing machine. Concepts like mercy and compassion were probably completely foreign to it. "My ship knows only me," Vector said finally. "It will not respond to alien commands. But if you truly wish to help, I can tell it to release me." Jake nodded. "We'll get you out of here." For a long moment, the apex said nothing. Then slowly, it began to emit a low, harmonic sound that seemed to come from deep in its chest. The Sound filled the chamber, resonating through bio walls. Around them, the organic debris that had trapped the creature began to shift and withdraw. As the weight lifted off the apex, Jake saw the full extent of its injuries. Green blood pooled beneath its body, and several of its biomechanical implants were damaged or completely torn away. But the creature was free. Now what? Amy asked. Jake looked at the dying alien wearing his jacket and made another decision that would change everything. Now we get our patient to the medical bay. Moving the apex to their shuttle proved to be the hardest thing any of them had ever attempted. Even with the creature's cooperation, Victor weighed at least 400 pounds and was badly injured. Amy had to rig a hovering stretcher using anti-gravity units from the shuttle's cargo bay, while Lisa worked to stabilize the alien's condition with her medical equipment. Jake's jacket remained draped over the creature's shoulders during the entire process. Every time someone tried to move it to get better access to Victor's injuries, the apex would make a sound of distress and pull the jacket back into place. It was clear that the simple gesture had affected the alien in ways none of them could understand. The biodecay is spreading faster now, Lisa reported as they carefully maneuvered the stretcher through the dying ship's corridors. Moving him is accelerating the process. We need to get him to our medical bay immediately. The journey back to their shuttle felt like it took hours, though Jake's chronometer showed it had only been 30 minutes. Victor drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering things in the Korthic language that their translators couldn't process. During his lucid moments, the apex would stare at the humans with those 3 golden eyes, as if trying to solve some impossible puzzle. "Why do you save me?" Victor asked during one of these moments, his voice weak but still carrying that strange, thunder-like quality. "Because it's the right thing to do," Jake replied, helping to guide the stretcher around a hole in the ship's decaying floor. "The right thing," the apex repeated slowly. "I do not understand this concept." Tony, who had been silent for most of the journey, spoke up. "Maybe that's the problem." When they finally reached the shuttle, they faced another challenge. The Meridian's medical bay had never been designed to treat alien life forms, especially not ones as large and complex as a Korthek apex. Lisa worked frantically to modify their equipment while Amy helped her rig new connections and power supplies. "The cellular structure is completely different from anything I've studied," Lisa said as she ran diagnostic scans on their patient. "His blood chemistry is based on copper instead of iron, and his nervous system has redundant pathways that I've never seen before, but the biodecay is definitely spreading. We need to stop it or he'll die within hours." Jake stood beside the medical bed watching the alien warrior who had terrorized human space for years. Victor looked smaller somehow, lying there connected to human medical equipment, though he was still enormous by human standards. The jacket was still draped over his upper torso, and one of his 4 hands clutched it tightly. "Fascinating," Pete said from where he stood near the door. "All those stories about how invincible these things are, and here's one lying in our medical bay." "He's not a thing," Jake said quietly. "He's a person." Victor's eyes opened at that comment. "Person? I am Apex. I am weapon. I am tool of the collective." "You're a living being who can think and feel," Lisa said while adjusting one of her machines. "That makes you a person in my book?" The Apex was quiet for a long moment. "Dr. Carter, you work to save my life. Why do you care if I live or die?" Lisa paused in her work and looked down at the alien. "Because every life has value, even yours." "Even though I have killed your people?" "Even then," Victor's 3 eyes fixed on her face. "This concept of universal value of life, it is not logical. The strong survive, the weak perish. This is natural law." Amy looked up from the power coupling she was adjusting. "Maybe natural law isn't the only law that matters." "Explain." Jake pulled up a chair beside the medical bed. "Among humans, we have something called compassion. It means we care about others even when they can't help us, even when they've hurt us. This compassion, it makes you weak, Victor said, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "Does it?" Tony asked, surprising everyone. The security chief had been against this rescue from the beginning, but something had changed in his attitude. "You're one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, and here you are in our medical bay. If we were weak, would we have been able to save you?" The Apex considered this. "You risk your lives to save an enemy. This is not weakness, but it is not logical either." "Not everything has to be logical," Jake said. "Sometimes you do things because they feel right, not because they make sense." Lisa's scanner beeped with new readings. "I think I've found a way to slow the biodecay. Your cellular regeneration systems are more advanced than anything we have, but they're being overwhelmed by the decay toxins. If I can filter your blood and boost your immune response, your own body should be able to fight off the infection." "You can save me?" Victor asked. "I think so. But the treatment will take several days, and you'll be very weak during the process." The Apex was quiet for a moment. "If I recover, I will be your prisoner." "No," Jake said. "You'll be our guest." "Guest? Someone we invite to stay with us. Someone we treat with respect and kindness." Victor's grip on the jacket tightened. "I do not understand your species. When Korthek are injured and cannot fight, they are left to die. It is efficient. It preserves resources for the strong." "That's horrible," Amy said. "It is logical." "It's wasteful," Lisa argued as she began the blood filtration process. "Every individual has unique knowledge and experience. When you let someone die, you lose all of that forever. But if they cannot contribute to the war effort—" "Who says everything has to be about war?" Pete asked. "What about art or music? Or just talking to someone? What about the value of simply being alive?" The Apex stared at him. "You speak of things that serve no military purpose." "Exactly," Jake said. "Life isn't just about fighting and surviving. It's about living." Victor was quiet for a long time as Lisa worked on him. The blood filtration machine hummed softly, slowly cleaning the decay toxins from his system. His breathing became easier, and some color returned to his dark skin. "Captain Morrison," the Apex said finally, "your jacket. It is not valuable in terms of materials or function. No, it's not. But you gave it to me when I was cold and dying." "Yes. Why?" Jake thought about how to explain it. "Because you needed it, because you were alone and scared, because it was the human thing to do." "The human thing to do," Victor repeated slowly. "In all my studies of your species, I focused on your weaknesses. Your small size, your short lifespans, your fragile bodies. I never studied your compassion." "Maybe that was your mistake," Tony said. The Apex looked at each of them in turn. "Perhaps it was. I am beginning to understand why humans have survived, despite being physically inferior to most species we have encountered." "Oh?" Lisa asked as she monitored his vital signs. "You do not survive alone. You survive together. Even with your enemies," Jake smiled. "Now you're getting it." Victor's eyes began to close as the medical treatment made him drowsy. "I have much to learn about being human." "You don't have to become human," Amy said gently. "You just have to remember that being alive is precious. All life is precious." As the Apex drifted off to sleep, still clutching Jake's jacket, the four humans stood around the medical bed in silence. None of them fully understood what they had started, but they all knew that something important had changed in that dying ship. When their captain had covered an enemy with warmth and kindness outside the medical bay, the Meridian continued its journey through space, carrying not just its human crew, but the seeds of something that would grow into the most important piece in galactic history. 3 days had passed since they brought Victor aboard the Meridian, and the changes in both the Apex and the crew were remarkable. The biodecay had been stopped completely, though the alien warrior would carry scars from it for the rest of his life. Thin lines of discolored tissue ran across his arms and torso where the toxins had damaged his cellular structure, but Lisa assured everyone that he would make a full recovery. Jake sat in his usual chair beside the medical bed, reading reports on his tablet while Victor slept. The Apex had been awake for longer periods each day, asking endless questions about human culture and society. His curiosity was almost childlike. which seemed strange coming from a creature designed to be the perfect warrior. "Captain," Victor said softly, his 3 eyes opening, "you are here again." "How are you feeling today?" Jake asked, setting down his tablet. "Stronger. Dr. Carter says my cellular regeneration is proceeding normally." The apex shifted slightly on the medical bed, careful not to disturb the various monitoring devices attached to his body. Jake's jacket was still draped over his shoulders, though Amy had needed to reinforce it with extra material to properly fit the alien's massive frame. "That's good news." Victor's golden eyes focused on Jake's face. "You spend much time here. Do you not have duties as captain?" "I do, but the ship runs fine without me for a few hours each day. Besides, I like talking with you." "Why?" Jake thought about how to answer. "Because you're interesting. You see things differently than we do. It helps me understand my own people better. I have been thinking about what you said, about compassion and the value of life." Victor paused, his eyes looking distant. "In Korthek society, I was created for a single purpose: to command ships and destroy enemies. I have never considered the possibility that life could have value beyond its utility." "What do you think now?" "I think perhaps the collective has made an error in its calculations." The medical bay door opened and Lisa entered with her morning scan results. She had been working around the clock to monitor Victor's recovery, and Jake could see the exhaustion in her eyes. But she always smiled when she looked at her patient. "Good morning, Victor. How's the pain today?" "Manageable, Dr. Carter. The healing accelerator you designed is very effective." Lisa ran her scanner over the apex's torso. "Cellular regeneration is at 90%. The nerve damage is healing faster than I expected. Your people's biology is really remarkable." "My people," Victor repeated thoughtfully. "Dr. Carter, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you look at me, what do you see?" Lisa paused in her scanning. "I see a patient who's getting better every day. I see someone who asks good questions and listens to the answers. I see a person who's learning to think about the world in new ways." "You do not see a monster?" "No, I see someone who was taught to be a monster but who's choosing not to be one anymore." Victor was quiet for a long moment. "The collective would say you are naive. They would say I am simply pretending to change in order to escape punishment for my crimes. Are you?" Jake asked. The apex looked at him with those 3 golden eyes. "No, I find that I no longer wish to cause suffering. This troubles me greatly." "Why does it trouble you?" "Because it means everything I was taught about. The nature of existence was wrong. The strong do not always survive. The weak are not always meant to perish. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from choosing to preserve life rather than destroy it." Amy entered the medical bay carrying a tray of food. She had been experimenting with ways to provide nutrition that Victor's alien digestive system could process lunchtime. "I tried a new protein synthesis today that should taste better. Thank you, Engineer Rodriguez. Your efforts to accommodate my dietary needs are greatly appreciated." Amy blushed slightly. "It's no trouble. Besides, it's fun figuring out how your biology works." Victor attempted to sit up, and Jake helped adjust the bed's position. The movement was careful and slow, but the apex was clearly getting stronger. "Engineer Rodriguez, may I ask why you chose to help save my life?" "You had no medical obligation, no military duty." Amy set the food tray on the bedside table. "Because Captain Morrison asked us to, and we trust his judgment." "But surely you had personal reservations. I have killed members of your species." "Yeah, I thought about that." Amy pulled up a chair and sat down. "But then I realized something. The Victor who killed those people isn't the same person lying in this bed. I am the same individual. Are you? The Victor who burned colonies wouldn't ask questions about the value of life. He wouldn't care if humans thought he was a monster. He wouldn't clutch a leather jacket like it was the most precious thing in the universe." Victor looked down at the jacket. "This garment has become important to me in ways I cannot fully explain." "It represents something," Jake said. "The moment when someone showed you kindness when you expected only death." "Yes, but more than that." It represents the possibility that beings can choose to be different than their nature suggests. Pete entered the medical bay carrying a tablet. Captain, we're getting a transmission from Earth Command. They want a full report on our encounter with the Korthik vessel. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had been dreading this moment. What exactly do they want to know? Everything. Ship specifications, weapon systems, and any intelligence we might have gathered from survivors. Victor's eyes moved from Pete to Jake. They wish to interrogate me. It's not like that, Jake said quickly. Captain Morrison, I understand. I am a valuable source of military intelligence. My knowledge of Korthak fleet movements and strategies could save many human lives. We're not going to hand you over for interrogation. The Apex stared at him. Why not? It would be the logical thing to do. Because you're not a prisoner. You're our guest, remember? But if my information could prevent the deaths of your people. Jake stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. Victor, can I ask you something? Of course. If the situation were reversed, if I were injured and aboard a Korthik ship, what would happen to me? Victor was quiet for a moment. You would be interrogated for information. When you had provided all useful intelligence, you would be killed. Or enslaved. And how does that make you feel now? It makes me feel wrong, incomplete, as if I have been missing something essential about the nature of existence. Lisa looked up from her medical equipment. That something is empathy, the ability to understand how others feel. I am beginning to understand this empathy, Victor said slowly. It is both a weakness and a strength. It makes you vulnerable to emotional manipulation, but it also allows you to form bonds that make your entire species stronger. Tony entered the medical bay looking concerned. Captain, that transmission from Earth Command? They're not just asking for a report. They're sending a ship to collect our passenger. When? 18 hours. Jake felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. In 18 hours, a military ship would arrive to take Victor away for interrogation. The alien would be questioned, probably tortured and eventually killed or imprisoned for the rest of his life. It was the sensible thing to do from a military standpoint, but Jake looked at the Apex lying in the medical bed, still wearing a battered leather jacket, still learning what it meant to value life, and knew he couldn't let that happen. Tony, how long until we reach the neutral zone? About 12 hours at current speed, and if we push the engines, we could make it in 8 hours, but why would we ? Tony's eyes widened as he understood what Jake was thinking. Captain, you can't be serious, dead serious. Victor struggled to sit up straighter. Captain Morrison, you cannot risk your career and your crew for me. I am not worth such a sacrifice. Jake turned from the viewport and looked at the alien who had become something more than an enemy. Yes, you are. Every life has value, remember, even yours? The Apex stared at him with those 3 golden eyes, and for the first time since they had found him, Victor began to understand what humans meant when they talked about friendship. The Meridian reached the neutral zone with 2 hours to spare before the military ship from Earth Command would arrive at their last known position. Jake stood on the bridge watching the boundary markers on his navigation display, knowing that once they crossed into neutral space, they would be beyond the reach of human military authority. They would also be branded as traitors. Captain, Amy said from her engineering station, I'm getting some unusual readings from the long-range sensors. Jake turned toward her. What kind of readings? Multiple ships approaching from the Korthak side of the neutral zone, big ones. The main screen flickered to life showing sensor data. Jake felt his blood run cold as he saw the formation of vessels moving toward them. 5 Korthak cruisers, each one capable of destroying the Meridian without breaking a sweat. They're here for me, Victor said from behind them. The Apex had insisted on coming to the bridge despite Lisa's protests about his medical condition. He stood near the captain's chair wearing Jake's jacket over a medical gown, looking stronger but still scarred from his ordeal. How do you know? Pete asked nervously. Because I sent them a message 3 hours ago. Everyone on the bridge turned to stare at the alien. Jake felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. What message? I told the collective about what happened. About how humans saved my life when they could have left me to die. About the compassion you showed to an enemy. Tony's hand moved toward his weapon. So you betrayed us after all? No, Victor said calmly. I told them the truth. The truth about what humans are really like. The communications console beeped with an incoming transmission. Pete looked at Jake questioningly. Put it through, Jake said. The main screen changed to show the interior of a Cortex ship. Jake had seen images of their vessels before, but never from the inside. The walls pulsed with organic light patterns, and biomechanical interfaces sprouted from every surface. Like technological coral, standing at the center of the command chamber was another apex, this one even larger than Victor. Its skin was a deeper purple, almost black, and its biomechanical implants were more extensive. When it spoke, its voice carried the same thunder-like quality, but with an edge of authority that made Jake's bones vibrate. I am Zephyrin the Conqueror, prime apex of the 3rd Collective Fleet. You hold Victor the Destroyer aboard your vessel. Yes, Jake replied, stepping forward. He's our guest. Guest? The alien commander's 3 eyes narrowed. Explain this. Trone. Victor moved to stand beside Jake, and Jake was surprised when the injured Apex placed one of his 4 hands on the human captain's shoulder. Prime Apex, these humans found me dying in the wreckage of my ship. They saved my life and asked for nothing in return. You were captured. No, I was rescued. Zephyr's eyes moved from Victor to Jake and back again. The collective has received your report, Victor. Your claims about human compassion are difficult to believe. Then observe for yourself, Victor said. He reached up and carefully removed Jake's jacket, holding it out for the other Apex to see. This human gave me this garment when I was cold and dying. He covered an enemy with his own protection. The Prime Apex stared at the jacket. It is a simple thing. It has no value. Its value is not in its materials, but in what it represents. It represents the moment when I learned that strength is not always measured by the ability to destroy. Jake watched the exchange with growing tension. 5 Corthic cruisers waited just outside weapons range, their biohulls pulsing with barely contained energy. One word from Zephyrin and the Meridian would be reduced to space dust. Prime Apex. Jake sighed. Victor has been our guest for 5 days. In that time, he's learned about human culture, and we've learned about Corthic society. Maybe it's time our people stopped fighting and started talking? Talking, Zephyrin repeated the word like it was foreign. You speak of peace with a species you have been at war with for 9 years. Yes, why? Jake thought about everything that had happened since they found Victor dying in his ship. Because we found out that under all the armor and genetic engineering, you're not so different from us. You feel pain, you get lonely, you can learn and grow. Those are the things that make someone a person, not what species they belong to. Victor spoke up again. Prime Apex, I have observed these humans for 5 days. They risked their lives to save an enemy. They provided medical care without expectation of reward. They treated me with dignity and respect, even though I had killed members of their species. This is not weakness. This is a strength we do not possess. The collective will say you have been compromised by exposure to human psychological manipulation. Then, the collective is wrong. A silence fell over both ships. Jake could hear the hum of the Meridian's engines and the soft beeping of various instruments. Through the view screen, he could see Zephyrin consulting with other Corthic officers who moved. In and out of camera range, finally the Prime Apex spoke again. Victor, you are ordered to return to the fleet immediately for debriefing. I request permission to remain aboard the Meridian as a cultural observer. Denied. Victor stepped forward, his 3 eyes fixed on the screen. Then I formally resign my commission and request asylum with the humans. The reaction on the Corthic ship was immediate. Jake could see other aliens moving frantically in the background, and Zephyr's expression darkened considerably. That is not possible. You are Apex. You belong to the collective. No, Victor said firmly. I belong to myself. These humans taught me that every being has the right to choose their own path. Jake felt a surge of pride and terror. Victor was risking everything by standing up to his own people, but he was also potentially starting a battle that would get them all killed. Prime Apex, Jake said quickly, we don't want to fight. We just want the chance to prove that humans and Korthek can coexist peacefully. Zephyrin studied them both for a long moment. You would harbor a defector from our military? We would offer sanctuary to someone who chose freedom over tyranny. The Prime Apex was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he spoke. The collective will consider your proposal. Victor, you will remain with the humans as our representative. If they prove themselves to be as compassionate as you claim, perhaps there is wisdom in exploring alternatives to warfare. Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, human. This is merely a postponement of judgment. If your species proves false, the war will resume with greater intensity than before. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Meridian in stunned silence. Outside, the Korthik fleet was already turning away, their biohulls glowing, as they prepared to jump back to their own space. Well, Pete said finally, that went better than expected. Victor carefully put Jake's jacket back on. Captain Morrison, I must ask you something. What? When you covered me with this jacket, did you know it would lead to this moment? Jake thought about it. No, I just saw someone who was cold and alone and I wanted to help. And now? Now I think maybe the best things happen when we stop thinking and start caring. 3 months later, Jake stood in the council chambers of Earth's orbital station watching as human and Korthik diplomats signed the first peace treaty between their species. Victor stood beside him, wearing a new jacket that had been specially tailored to fit his alien frame. But he still kept the original jacket in his quarters. Cleaned and carefully preserved, the war that had claimed millions of lives was over, ended not by superior weapons or brilliant strategy, but by a simple act of kindness in the depths of space. Historians would mark this as the moment when humanity proved that their greatest strength lay not in their ability to fight, but in their refusal to let anyone die alone in the dark. And in the end, that had been enough to change the galaxy forever.